Hello from London! Well, it's time for the third weekly video diary of my month's summer language sprint project. What I'm doing is trying to increase the amount of work I'm putting into my beginner's Japanese and to my intermediate Basque for 4 weeks. I've got a bit of extra time on my hands because I'm not working during this month's period. So before the update though, first of all, welcome if you're new here. I'm Dr. Gareth Popkins. Here on the channel we talk about language learning from many angles. We've got interviews with inspiring language learners and movers and shakers. I discuss methods and materials. I attend language learner events and do a bit of travel vlogging, as well as talking about my own language learning project. So if you haven't yet subscribed for the vibe, please do. And you can get my free Language Learner Pro webinar training by following the link underneath this video. So it's time for the update, and if you saw the week 2 video diary, you'll know that I didn't quite do the full 5 hours Basque during week 2. I was 50 minutes short. This week I'm pleased to say I managed to do the full 5 hours in both languages. In fact, it was 5 hours flat with Basque and 5 hours 50 with Japanese. So the running totals at the moment, at the end of week 3, they were 15 hours 50 for Basque and 15 hours 40 for Japanese. I'd done a bit more Basque during week 1, so I had a bit of slack there despite my dismal performance in week 2 with the language. Now then, just a quick update in detail about what I've been doing on both languages. I'm working, as you'll know if you've seen the other updates, with the Japanese from Zero textbook series for my Japanese. Now, I started Japanese in January. The reason I started Japanese was, among other things, that I'm heading out to Japan for a couple of weeks in the middle of October. So that is the goal. My aim is to get to the end of book 3 of Japanese from Zero before I go to Japan, although that is not now looking as if it's an achievable goal, but I certainly have got a good way through the third book, because I started the third book during week 2 of this language learning sprint, and I continued with lesson 1, and on Friday in week 3 I moved into lesson 2. New things that came up, well, in lesson 1 it was a new counter word. Japanese has counters, so like we say sort of 15 head of cattle in English, with head as the counter word. This system is used much more frequently in Japanese, as it is in Chinese, for example, and there are different counters for different classes of objects: small round objects, long thin objects, objects which are like pieces of paper, sort of flat, or tickets and that sort of thing. And the new one we learned in lesson 1 was kan, which is used with units of time, time span, so minutes, hours, months, years and so on. Oh, and another new one, which was paju, which is used with pages and is one of those examples of the many loan words, I think, in Japanese. On Friday I moved into Unit 2 of Japanese from Zero, and because the third book is teaching the Chinese, I was going to say, characters, although of course they're into the Japanese language as well, the kanji, there were more of those to learn at the beginning of the chapter. And we were dealing with the numbers 7 to 10 and 100 and 1000 in chapter 2. So they're taking it very gradually, just 6, 7 or 8 new kanji characters coming in each lesson in this book. Now, I'd already done some work on these earlier on, so the characters again in Unit 2 were not new to me. What was good though was because there were more numbers being taught, we had to practice some of the other counter words which had been introduced back in book 1 actually of Japanese from Zero, but which I didn't feel on top of then, and I just haven't recalled and practiced enough since then to get good at. So I certainly valued the opportunity to do a bit more practice of them. I'm going to need a lot more with all these different counter words. But it was good progress really with Japanese from Zero. There are some quite traditional things in the book, although it's a very sort of down with the kids book. It does have translations back and forth, which is something I think is very good and shouldn't be scorned. It's a great training, I think, translating backwards and forwards. And the good thing about the book, though, is it's not in any way dry, that all the materials presented, the texts that are presented, are dialogues, sort of quite natural dialogues between two people, obviously, then, and only maybe 5 or 6 lines, or even sort of 4 lines in length. So they're quite short and not overwhelming. So it's far from being sort of the pen of my aunt or my hovercraft is full of eels, as the joke goes about obscure sentences used in language teaching materials. So I was working on the reading passages and the conversation translations and so on in the book in Unit 1 during week 3. So that's been what's been going on with the Japanese. Turning to Basque, I had 3 Skype lessons with each of my 3 teachers, 3 30-minute lessons, one on Monday with Aidar, and we're basically catching up because I hadn't seen her in week 2. And we were discussing actually my trip to Coventry over the weekend at the beginning, just before week 3. And I was trying to tell her the story of Lady Godiva, the heroine of Coventry who famously rode through the city naked on a horse in the, I think it was the 11th century. In order to persuade her husband, the local lord, to lower taxes on the populace at large with whom she sympathised. And the story was nobody was allowed to look through their windows as she rode through the town. But one young man called Tom, the original Peeping Tom, did look, and he was blinded as a result by God as punishment. Now, it's a bit difficult to explain all this in Basque, still more when I started to try and talk about the declining fortunes of the Coventry car building industry during towards the end of the 20th century. That was all a bit of a strain on my Basque. But it was interesting. We were conversing all the way through the lesson, and so I never actually got to using the materials from the Bakarka course, which I work on with Aida normally. With Gary on Wednesday, again, a lot of conversation, a bit of work from Bakarka. With Gary, I'm going through some of the earlier units of Bakarka I did with Aidar several months ago as a way of recalling and revising. Gary does a lot more active correction of my work than the other 2 teachers, and it reminds me of how good it is to have several teachers, because you do get then different approaches, and the different style of each teacher can work in a complementary way, I think, if you've got 2 or 3 teachers. So then finally on Friday it was with Irati, and that was a great lesson. I was really firing on all cylinders with her actually. She's very lively, and I felt that my Basque was flowing, and we just basically had a great conversation. I was working on my own then with the Habe materials that I use, where the topic was noise in general, zarata, but it was talking about noisy neighbours and disputes about loud music and that sort of thing, and a bit of an overlap in subject topic with what I'm looking at in the Ariane B2.1 book at the moment, where the topic has been living arrangements. For example, is it better to buy or to rent an apartment? Is it a good idea to share an apartment or not? So just by coincidence, there's a bit of overlap on subject matter there. But the Ariane textbook is really full of very interesting and diverse topics for study and conversation. And this is one of the reasons I like a well-designed modern textbook, because it does force you into different topic areas and gets you out of your comfort zone. Of course, it's important to talk about things that you're interested in and things that are relevant to you. But if you want to really expand your powers of expression, there's an argument for actually having to talk about a range of things, whether you want to or not, it seems to me. Anyway, that's what was going on with both languages. The other thing I wanted to say was I have noticed that because I'm not commuting this month, because I'm not working, I haven't been actually doing as much listening to the Pimsleur course as I would have been doing, because I've lost my walk to the underground station each morning when I had the headphones on. And also I had been listening to Pimsleur in the underground, or more recently using Japanese flashcards, and the time for that is also not available. So if your routine changes, you have to sort of build what you were doing at a certain stage of your routine into your new routine somehow, it seems to me. And I haven't always been that successful during these 3 weeks so far in doing that. Although I did take the flashcards with me to Coventry for use on the train and on the way back. And similarly this weekend that's just ended at the end of week 3, I spent the weekend in Coventry and I had the flashcards with me for use on the train on the way there and on the way back too. I've been continuing with my caffeine-free period as well. If you've seen some of my travel vlogs, you know there's always a few espressos in there, photos of coffee machines and so on. I do love coffee, but at the beginning of the month, I decided I'd have one of my periodic detoxes from coffee, and that's really continued. I did go to a coffee shop in in Coventry. I've had a few coffees over the weekend, but generally I've been sticking with the herbal teas, which seems to me a nice way actually to start the morning, particularly those days when I've got up a bit earlier. I'm finding I'm waking up quite early anyway in the summer at the moment because it's light, even though it's got rather colder here in London again. And I'm having some lemongrass mate herbal tea, which is a nice pick-me-up in the morning, and I'm enjoying that, much as I do, of course, love my coffee, and we'll be going back to it in time. Do you like to make a hot drink when you're studying your languages? Sometimes it's a way of pacing out as well. So I'll do half an hour, set the timer, do a bit of the Pomodoro Technique to get me going. If you don't know what that is, there's a video on it in this on the channel. I'll link to it underneath. And then I've done a half an hour. I sometimes go down, put the kettle on, make another herbal tea, and come back up and do the next session. Now, in terms of other stuff that's been going on in the last week, I was busy preparing for the second in my Russian A2 revision webinar series, which then took place on Wednesday. So that's quite a lot of work actually to get the concept right and to write the slides. I also did a bit of editing this week on an interview which I'd recorded earlier with Dylan English, which you may have seen. He went out on Thursday last week. He's someone who took a gap year and learnt really good Basque and Mandarin as well. During just 1 year, actually. It wasn't before he started at university, because he's majoring actually in, I think it's geography, not in languages. But he loves languages so much that he decided to sort of pause his studies and take a gap between the first year at the university and the second year, which is really unusual in the English system, and I don't know if it's generally allowed. Actually, you might have to get special permission. But he went off and he, did great things, and his Basque is absolutely amazing. And it's a very inspiring and wide-ranging interview. So if you didn't see that, you might want to check it out. Coming up next Thursday, there'll be a travel vlog, which is something as well. It's taken me a while to edit, but it's a bit different and it's a fun one, and I think you'll enjoy it. So look out for that on Thursday. And as I say, at the end of the week, I had a lovely weekend in Canterbury, visiting friends. I had not been there properly ever really to look round, although I had set foot in the town previously. I'd not been to the cathedral before, or the wonderful St. Augustine's monastery. St. Augustine came to convert the Kentish Angles during the Anglo-Saxon period to Christianity in the 6th century, and I'm familiar with the history and the stories, and it was amazing to go and see his abbey and the place where his grave used to be, although it's since been moved or lost, but they know the location, and the graves of several Anglo-Saxon and Wessex kings from the 6th and 7th century. Amazing just to think how far back that is, and some of the walls and so on of the abbey still standing. Meanwhile, of course, Canterbury Cathedral is the main cathedral in England, followed by York, the cathedral of my hometown. So, of course, I sort of think York is better, but that's a different story. But it was great to get out, the big smoke, out of London here at the end of a hard week. And I met up with Kirsten Cable from The Fluent Show, and it was great to talk shop about language learning and language blogging with Kirsten, who lives in Canterbury. So that's what's been going on in week 3. I've got 1 week of this project left, and I want to get as far as I can during the remaining days then, and I'll be giving you a final update before I revert to my previous pattern of the 30 minutes of Japanese 7 days a week. What about you? How are things looking for you in your language learning in the middle of August? How do you find you cope when your language learning routine changes? So if, like me, you're no longer commuting or something else has changed in your life, do you find it disruptive, or are you quite good at, setting up something else in its place? Or don't you set any store by habit and routine in language learning at all? I'm somebody who certainly does, but we're all different. Maybe let me know in the comments below. And do look out then for something different on Thursday, and for the next and final, update diary next Tuesday. Thanks a lot for watching then. Have a great language learning week yourself, and see you next time. Agur!